Hey, where is everybody?
Money is endlessly interesting to me. I mean, it's also sort of like sometimes I joke when people start to talk about religion or whatever and how they were raised, and I'm like, it's not really a joke, but I'm like, I was raised by capitalists, like I was, which I don't think is a particularly new idea, for which is to say that the word that's maybe missing here for me is like how deeply American it is to connect a good amount of your value as a human to the amount of money that you have in the bank, right? And so I think and like you said, I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is the specific shame that comes with not having money in the bank, but also I think it's both sides, right? And this is a thing that I was really interested in with flight as opposed to want, is just like, I think money is complicated for just about everybody, and I think that shame around money exists for a good number of people, right? Which is to say there is the person who earned their money, who is self-made, which I don't believe in, right? But there is a person, and then so much of their self-worth is associated with having sort of made that money. But when you don't come from money, I think there's this fear of sort of, am I performing my wealth in a way that makes sense to other people? Do people see and understand what I have accomplished, right? And then there's also the sort of shame around if the money was given to you and you didn't earn the money, and or if you work hard and you don't have money, it never stops being something that people are grappling with in more and less abstract ways, depending on how much money they have. And I think one of the things that's most interesting to me as a writer is the sort of, I love a good Venn diagram, and I think it's all of the ways that it's like, you look at the word money and there is overlap for almost all of us, right? In terms of like, there is something about the word money that evokes desire. There's something about the word money that evokes shame. There's something about the word money that makes us want to like look away, like you were saying earlier, or like not talk about it. But also that something is really specific and different for every person, because we come from a relationship to money. We're brought up with a sort of value system around money, but then also that shifts as we live in the world around money, and it's endlessly this is a bad story, but I'm going to tell you because this is what you do to people maybe, which is that my parents with whom I have, okay, I'll tell it. My parents with whom I have a complicated relationship, but whom I love, they came up for my daughter's birthday, and my mom gave my daughter a money tree. And it was a tree with money attached to it, and it was a nice gesture. But the thing is that like my daughter doesn't really have a relationship to the inherent value of money. Like she was like, Grandma gave me a tree. Like she didn't know what to do because she's a kid, and she was just like, I don't know what. And she started like, she gave some of it to her sister, and then she started like giving it to friends and her cousin. And we were like, I think we're gonna, we like put it in the bank for her or whatever. But it was just this sort of fascinating realization of like, her relationship to the idea of money is so different. And there's this object money, right? Like I always say to students, like they'll put a number on a page, right? But like that number, $10,000 or $5,000 or $200,000, every reader is coming to that number with a completely different idea, right? So you still have to teach the reader sort of what that number means to that character. And I think the same thing is true of money more broadly. It's kind of endlessly interesting to me because it means something to everybody, but it means something almost like very different to each individual, even when they come from the same place.
Yeah. Well, and I think now is a good time to remind ourselves too that money is just a convention and it isn't even real.
Yeah.
Like I love to think about that sometimes. Like, well, who decided? We just put these pieces of paper together and decide that they're worth these things, and we all just sort of agree on it.
Yeah.
But what the hell is it? What the hell is money? Like it's kind of an imagined thing that holds us together somehow and allows us to trade goods and services. But I think that, the ways in which you write in Flight about these various characters, which I should say distinguishes it from Want. I feel like you're kind of working on a bigger canvas in some sense when it comes to the new book, because you've got multiple couples, in the same family, just to give listeners a setup. And feel free to correct me if I screw this up, but you've got a family with a matriarch who has passed away, a beloved matriarch named Helen. And this is their first Christmas without her. And they are coming together upstate in New York. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay, upstate in New York, at one of the siblings' houses. They have kids. They're at that stage of life in their 30s and early 40s or something. Mm-hmm. And there's 3 kids. Helen has 3 kids. They're all married. Mm-hmm. And Helen, who did not have a will, left behind a house in Florida, mm-hmm. which one of the siblings wants to live in and raise her kids in, mm-hmm. even though it's really all 3 of their inheritance. There's a lot more to it, but that's the basic setup. Mm-hmm. And what I love about Flight is the psychological depth that you are able to render for each of these characters, the way you're able to make them distinct on the page. They're coming at this from their different angles, as you were saying. Yeah. And I found myself agreeing with and disagreeing with each of them at various turns in the book. Like I admired that about it. There's a complexity to the way that you portray people in their relationship to money that feels very real to me. And I couldn't find a clear villain. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I couldn't find a clear hero either, even though they're all coming at it from different angles. Like one of the characters works as an attorney, mm-hmm. and is doing well for herself and has worked really hard and has like maybe a sense of responsibility and like real world understanding that, her siblings-in-law might not, because they come from a place of greater privilege or less good sense or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Another one's an artist, or, another one is a former artist. Another one is sort of a little bit immature, and yet I could relate to all of them. Yeah. So I'm imagining that you are living your life at a similar stage of life, interacting with all sorts of different couples, as one does when one is a parent of young children. And also, relating, I would assume, to family members. I don't know if you have any siblings, but it seems like you might. Yeah. And just sort of getting a sense, as I often do, of all this subtext. People going through their lives and then just like quietly wondering, like, how are they making it? Yeah. How are they paying for private school? Or yeah. How are they living in that house? Or why did they have to suddenly, uproot and move to, the Midwest or whatever it is, that happens in life. And this book takes an X-ray to all that. Yeah. Well, there's no higher compliment, I think, and I'm grateful to you for the read, because I think my main goal, and I also worry this makes me sound like sort of an asshole, but my main goal with the book was this sort of constant state of sort of sense of destabilization, in terms of, I think it's a deeply human desire to want to be able to take a side. Like when my kids listen to NPR in the morning and they're always like, who's the best? Do we like this guy? Or whatever. And it's like, I wanted the reader to kind of feel the impulse to do that every once in a while, but I wanted to constantly subvert or destabilize that desire by adding a new component to the character. So I think especially as I went through later and later drafts, because I also don't think any of these people is wrong, right? Like I don't believe in that. It's like Tess is the lawyer and she's very practical and all of those things, and she has the most money, but also she spends most of the book envying these siblings
because she doesn't have what they had, which is that they had Helen, you know, and it's also just like she is a mom, and she sort of has been taught and understands that like one of the best ways to care for your family maybe in this country is to make a lot of money, but she feels constantly uncomfortable in her ability to actually care for her children when they're right there in front of her, right? But I don't think that makes her a bad mom. I just think that she has strengths and she has weaknesses, and it makes her a person, right? And so I think that I was just sort of constantly, because then again, a thing that happens, and you're talking about parenthood, like I think a thing that's hard about parenthood, and it's also just the thing about middle age, which I find kind of just endlessly interesting as a writer. I keep talking to my friend about how, like, you know, what have we been doing all these years? Because you have to kind of hit a certain age to feel the full depth of just what it is to be alive, you know? But I feel like one of the things that happens with parenthood is every choice feels so high stakes. And it's so hard to not sort of look at someone else, or it's hard for me. I don't know if it's hard for other people, but it's hard to look at someone else and see that either they're making another choice and or they have the ability or privilege to make another choice, right? So like someone can send their kids to private school. I can't send my kids to private school. I believe in public school. I still envy the option, you know, like it's that sort of thing where it's like, it feels so high stakes, right? But another thing that I think I was interested in is it feels so high stakes, but often the things that feel so high stakes we're wrong about, right? Like whatever school our kids go to or don't go to, like the world is burning. Like there's larger concerns for our kids' futures, right? Beyond like the college they get into or whatever. But it's, which is to say there are so many different spaces of differentiation in terms of both the fear we experience as parents and also the choices we make as parents, and the fear and the choices that feel important and real to us in our sort of daily lived experience, which I don't think we can help but experience. But then also the fear and choices that are sort of bigger, and our ability or not to navigate that differentiation, you know, I think was as much my interest here as the sort of granular differentiation between the parents. And again, I think like, I believe in my belly, all these people love their kids, you know, like all these parents love their kids. Like most parents I've ever met in my life love their kids, right? But it can look vastly different. And I think and it can have vastly different consequences. A lot of that love can feel like violence. Like, I don't mean to undercut sort of the impact or consequences of that love. But again, I'm interested in that. I'm interested in looking at the Venn diagram and then sort of using those points of divergence as an opportunity to create narrative tension and maybe ask the reader to ask some questions.
And so you wrote this book, I guess you must have started it not long after we spoke about wants, mm-hmm. right? You said you wrote it, I want to say you wrote it in 2020.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I was writing it when we talked. The thing that came pre-COVID was I really wanted to write. I'm ultimate, like the thing that gets me back into a book, right, is some sort of formal challenge, like some sort of formal cliff jumping, right? And the thing that I knew that I wanted to do even before finishing Want was that I wanted to write a book with a sort of roving point of view. And maybe not least because my friend, who is sort of my closest writer friend, was like, don't do that. You can't do that. Stop doing that. Why are you obsessed with that? And I was like, well, now I want to do it even more. Right. And so I knew I wanted that, but I also, at least for myself, I knew that I couldn't do it if I didn't put a lot of constraints on it. And so pre-COVID, I had a sort of skeleton of an idea, which was that it would happen over 3 days, that it would mostly happen in a house. And I knew that the sort of major plot point that happens in the last third, I knew that would happen because, again, like I think it was in part like around these different ideas of parental anxiety and fear and just like human anxiety and fear. And I knew that I wanted to concretize that. Like, it was important to me that, yes, to some extent, these fears are either misplaced or without reason, or are we fearful about the things we should actually be fearful about? But also, children are vulnerable bodies that find themselves in scary situations, you know, and will sort of continue to. And so I knew all of that. And actually, very weirdly, I also knew the last scene. I knew the last, this has never sort of happened to me as a writer, but I knew the last scene and I found it corny. And I was like, I have to write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite this book until I believe in this last scene. And that was sort of my directive for this book, which was very different. So it's a very long-winded way of saying, when you and I spoke, I was carrying the last scene around in my head. And I think that I was sort of threading through the sort of main action of the book.
And you were also going through a lot of difficulties, I have read, that feel related to the concerns of your books, your last two books. And I want to say you moved 7 times since March 2020. Is that right?
We did.
Oh my God. That's tricky. A lot.
It was tricky. It was hard. I mean, it wasn't, this will maybe make it sound better, which is we, my husband got a new job on March 13th, 2020. Not a great time to get a new job. And because he was the first in when there were COVID layoffs, he was the first out. And we had a really terrible landlord. Things have felt really, really hard for lots of reasons, but also, I'm a writer. We didn't have a lot of money and he got laid off and we were just like uncle, like we had been, he was working like 12 or 13 hours. He was working in he was working at a company that went back to the office like in May 2020. So he was commuting and I was making him commute on his bike because I was scared. And that was like a 20-mile bike ride. Anyway, so things were really not very easy before he got laid off. And so when he did get laid off, we love his parents very, very much and they're wonderful people. And they were also going through some hard stuff. So there was a part of that sort of that last valve just sort of cracking or whatever, that was a mixed metaphor, that we were just like, you know what, uncle.
Yeah.
So we put all of our stuff in storage. It's still very sad to me because I think that both of us, all 4 of us, had every intention of coming back to New York, but we just like needed to, it was just, pre-COVID had not been easy. And then it only got harder.
Right.
And so we put our stuff in storage, which is just to say a lot of those moves, our stuff was still in storage. So, so that made it, maybe easier. But then we went down to Florida and we stayed with my husband's parents for a while. And then, there were some other moves, but what ultimately happened was that we ended up in Maine, because my husband was offered a job and it was a very sort of temporary, it was a job that the bulk of it would happen during summer and maybe we would go back to New York. But long story short, like, we can't afford New York. Long story short, like, I think it was, and it's interesting to think about how it informed the book, because first of all, like, a lot of very angry people who read Want were like, they should just leave New York. Which I understood, I understood their point, and we did leave New York, and we left New York because we couldn't afford it, which is fine. People do it all the time. It's not a tragedy. But the thing that I think I'm just endlessly interested in as a writer and as a person is the fact that people prioritize sort of finances as the ultimate reason to make choices, and like, I'm a person who has had no choice but make choices because of finances, but also like, I miss New York every single day, and not because of museums or whatever, but like, because my community's there and my community matters a lot to me, and
sure. Yeah.
And it's, I lived there for 11 years. I don't know. It's just to say, like, I think in addition to money, I'm interested in the ways that money and concerns about money obscure our ability to acknowledge all of the other things of life that are valuable. I mean, even just like we left, I'm just going on, but when we left, it sucked, right? Like it really sucked. But my husband's parents are wonderful and we love them. And my kids got to spend 6 months with their grandparents in this way that they never in their lives would have had that experience. And also, my husband and I both grew up in Florida. I love Florida. I also hate Florida and feel like deeply complicated things about it. But in no other universe would our kids have been able to experience this place that is like so fundamental to my and my husband's forming. Like, like we took them to the Spoil Islands we used to go to when we were kids. And like my husband was teaching them to surf and, like all of these things that again, like is just in my body. The fact that our kids got to see that, like, did feel really special and wonderful, and I think like our finances were shitty, and a lot of our friends were like worried, but we are so lucky, like we have a lot of people who love us a lot and we were fine. Like we were completely fine and continue to be fine.
Yeah. I relate to all that. I mean, it's like the ups and downs of life in general are there for most all of us. I guess they're there for all of us in one way or another, but especially for those of us who are up against it financially. And then you take COVID and you kind of layer that on top of everything. And I think it just intensified so much. I think there will be so many books written about what the COVID pandemic did to our society in relationship to everything else that was already happening.
Yeah.
It felt like some kind of accelerant. I feel like a lot of people lost their minds.
Yeah.
Maybe me included. I don't know, but I just feel like a lot of people, I look at it, I'm like, was this COVID? Is COVID what is causing, because of people being cut off from their communities and the economic upheaval and the fear and the isolation and the mistrust, and then you have Trump kind of, in the middle of it all, and oh my God, just a crazy time to be alive. And so I feel what you're saying about like, we were dealing with shit, but we had a good family, people who cared about us, a place to go. Our kids got to have experiences that they might not have been able to have. And I think there's probably a lot of us who have some version of that, the silver linings of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's like and it's funny. At first I kept saying to people, like, I reject the concept of a silver lining, right? Because all of these people are dying and all of these things are terrible. But like, what the fuck else do we have? You know what I mean? Like it's
all
terrible.
Silver linings.
Yeah. Like terrible things happened and terrible things will continue to happen. And also, right? Like, and also all of these other things are happening too.
Mm. So when you wrote this book, I think you wrote it with a greater connectivity to your writing friends, and maybe you got more feedback on it than you had with previous books. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. I think a couple things changed. Like, I think the first thing that changed is when we left. I have a friend with whom I'm very close, but he's a writer too. So I'll just Ruman Alam, and we used to meet for dinner once a week, but then we left the city and we sort of started talking on the phone every day, basically. And I think that sort of shifted something for me in terms of just like someone else who was carrying some of this around with him too, and I could check in with and be like, he knew and continues to know enough about sort of what I'm thinking about and mulling over that and I for him that like it's become this sort of fun thing of like, if your friend is also carrying your book around with them, they can sort of say, hey, I read this thing, or hey, I saw this thing, or I was thinking about this, and it becomes this kind of, for me at least, it becomes this really exciting and rich alchemy of sort of experiences. And then I think too, like COVID was so, like you said, it was so alienating in so many ways. And also I think as a parent, I was so, and just I think as a person, I tend to have a hard time like there's a moment in the book I give this line to Tess, but to be honest, it's me too, which is just like, if she stops being productive even for a minute, she'll die, you know? And I think like I have that tendency, and maybe because of that tendency, I have the particular gift of having a bunch of friends that are writers, which is to say that a bunch of, not a bunch, like there were a handful of my friends were working on books while I was working on Flight, and we were trading them, which felt like a sort of productivity, right? In terms of like, it wasn't just talking on the phone, which I didn't always feel allowed to do. Or it wasn't just like Zooming with my friends, but it was like this very specific act of like, you need a reader, I need a reader, I'm going to read. And then we would Zoom because we were in Florida and I wasn't seeing any of my friends. And then of course it would be like 2 days just rolling around inside of the brain of these people that I love. Right. And it felt so good. We were so alienated. Everything felt so hard. I missed my friends and my community so much. And I just kept thinking, oh my God, I'm so grateful that I'm a writer, because I'm just rolling around in everything that's wonderful about my friends. Right. And then they're doing it for me. And then we would get on Zoom and we would have these like sort of marathon talks about our work. And it was useful in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways that was useful that I'm just sort of naming as we're talking is that like, one, I think was a lot about, oh shit, books are not what I thought they were. And that makes me so sad. You know, like they're not as powerful as I thought they were. And that makes me so sad. And they're not as powerful as I thought they were. And that still makes me sad and it makes me angry and all of those things. But also books really helped me during COVID. And like the fact that books can function as intimacy at a time when we felt so alone. And again, the added sort of cheat that like, it could be intimacy with my friends because, you know, they're writers. It felt really, really special. And I think it propelled the book in terms of having people to talk about it, but it also propelled the book in terms of like what I believed the book could achieve. And even honestly, like that last scene, like I think like the last scene is about people coming together around art. And it's not something I sure that I believed in when I started writing this book. But I think I did at the end.
What are some books? I mean, I have a couple of things I want to ask you. The first of which, before I forget, is like you mentioned that books provided a kind of intimacy and a solace to you during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. That was maybe extra considering how isolating it all was. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but are there books in particular that you can point to that you really leaned on or got something from?
Yeah, I mean, I read a bunch of biographies of artists, which I'm not going to remember everything, but I know I read the Sally Mann Hold Still, which is a memoir, I guess. I read the Adrienne Rich. I read the Sylvia Plath. I read the Didion and the Sontag. I read Sigrid Nunez's Sempre Susan. And I read my grandma died during COVID when we were in Florida. And I was reading, I had saved it. I really love and admire Lily King, but I hadn't read Writers and Lovers yet. And I think there's something so specific about that book. Felt to me like a warm bath. Like I was going to hospice a little bit and feeling sad, complicated things. And the book didn't make any of that better, but like, it was this sort of constant solace when I got into bed at night. That really, I felt so lucky to have it, you know, like it didn't like fix it. It didn't, you know, it was sad, but I felt so glad that I had a book to go to you know, like my husband is a really good guy and we were talking, but like there was only so much he could say, and my kids are great kids. But like the fact that when I was alone with Lily's book, mattered to me.
Sure. Well, and it's also the time, and I mean, that's the function I think that books perform so often, is that you're dealing with the end result of somebody laboring often for like many years to crystallize and clarify those thoughts.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get that from a conversation 99 times out of 100. I mean, it's just because the labor isn't there, or the energy. There's so much human energy in a book if it's done well. And I feel the same way. There's that, especially if you're finding a book at a time in your life and it's just completely resonant. It's giving you exactly what you need. That's the best.
Yeah. No, it's so, and it's, I also think it clarified for me as a writer, which to be clear, I still struggle with a lot, is it's just not about you. It's just not about me. Like, my work is like, it starts from like a deeply personal space, but at least as I experience what I do, which is not, I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, because I don't think everyone maybe needs to do this, but like, every draft after the first draft is about making it more and more a thing I can give to someone else, right? Which in some ways is about killing some of the parts of it that are sort of specific or necessary for me, but not specific or necessary for anybody else. And I think, which is just sort of a long-winded way of saying, I think that I sort of was reaffirmed in the idea of art as an offering, because I just felt like these writers were giving something to me, and giving something to me that was so essential and important to me at that time. And so I think it helped me sort of re-clarify that for myself in terms of sort of like, that is, I am here to make an offering.
Yes. No, that's great. That's great to hear. I know. I love the way that you said that, because for some reason, and I'm only going to speak for myself here, though maybe you can relate, it can be easy to lose track of that when you're in the midst of writing a book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then add to that the particular mindfuck of putting a book out, and it feels like it's like you're dancing as fast as you can, but like, you made the thing is that it's the thing. Like, so take the thing or don't take the thing. But I think to some extent, like, you as a writer, you just go make another thing, like you go make another thing.
Yeah, I bristle a little bit. I bristle a little bit at some of the responsibilities that are incumbent upon the modern author when it comes to like the post-publication marketing and, the hustle part of it. Like, I get that some of that's going to be necessary, but there's also a part of me that's like, hey, I just spent a decade working on this fucking thing. Like, can you please just give me, like, read it or don't read it? I'm done, I did my work, but it's, I guess it's part of the process.
Yeah. No, it's a weird, I think bristle is a good word. I think that's how I feel too. Like, I understand it's part of it, and I want to do whatever I can to get my book out in the world, but also there's something sort of fundamentally antithetical to what it is to be a writer, to then like have people looking at you, I feel like most writers are sort of, in part, we became writers because we're observers and because we're sort of careful and quiet in the corner, and also that, especially for people who write novels, like, I need a little time, like I need a little time to take it in and process it and sort of recalibrate it and re-articulate it as something I actually believe in. And the idea that then all of a sudden you're just throwing words around it makes me nervous.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I think it's like the two experiences are really different.
Yeah.
Like when you're in a book and you're writing a book, that is a fundamentally different situation than when you're out like doing this sort of thing or promoting the book or, I don't know, all that kind of like drudgery, like the outreach, the emails.
Yeah.
That stuff. Different.
No, it's hard. And it's like I was saying to a friend, it's like, it's so precious to you. It feels, again, I don't think it's me. And in some ways, like, I have much less respect for me, the person, than I do me, my work. Right. But then it's just this thing that people can just swipe at and bat at, it's like so quick. It's just almost like it feels like sport, like there's something about sort of looking at something that somebody's made and it feeling just like a game that people are playing. And it doesn't, when I'm making it, it doesn't feel like a game. So I think it makes me like really uncomfortable and afraid that when you put it out in the world, it sometimes does feel like a game.
Sure. And then other times you'll get like the nicest email from a complete stranger.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
a message or whatever on. So I think those are the best things, because then you know that it's connected.
I got one I was actually like having my sort of weekly panic attack yesterday, and emailing, texting my agent and calling my friend and, you know, my poor husband at this point. But like, but then this morning I was coming back from my run, and I got an email from a woman about want, and she was a high school teacher, and I was like sitting on my front steps crying, you know, and I emailed it. I sent like a portion of it to my friend, and I was like, never mind, I'm fine. You know, like, never mind. Yeah. Like, this is why we do this.
You got to save those. I think you have to save those. I have a little folder, and like I save those notes for days when I'm feeling particularly shitty, because it's like, okay, I know that like it's not going to land everywhere, and some people aren't going to like it, or it's going to get batted around, as you say, and not treated with respect or something. But there are people for whom the book will land. And
yeah.
What more? I mean, I don't know. I don't have much. Maybe I should have higher expectations, but I think I've been chastened or humbled or whatever in my adult life. And I think, sort of like you, I've had to come to terms with the fact that my idealized version of books and what they can do in the world and what the writing life entails is not how it actually is.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and so I think like I'm happy with just like that one email from somebody. Yeah. I would love for my book to connect with 1 billion people. That'd be great. You know, like who wouldn't? But it's okay. It's okay with me. Like I can accept hitting a smaller audience, but hitting the people that I'm supposed to hit, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, a bunch of things on that, but when my first book came out, which like nobody read, like an interesting thing about putting this flight out is that like sometimes people are sort of saying, I get emails or whatever, and people are like, I'm so excited about your second book. And I'm like, what's my third? You know?
Wait, and the first book is called Hold Still.
The first book is called Hold Still. Very good. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But not a lot of people read it. And it's like you're saying, it's part of being a writer. It's fine, you know, like it's totally fine. And I think it was actually really, like, I'm grateful to have a book that totally failed, because then when Want was really lucky, I was able to really understand, first, what a gift that was, and second, that it's random. You know what I mean? That there's an aspect to it that's just luck and arbitrariness and, you know, all of those things. And like, but when my first book came out, my oldest friend, who is a lawyer, who is not a writer, we were on the phone, and I was similarly freaking out. And she was like, you know what? Somewhere right now, some person just like you is sitting down and cozying up with your book in the exact way that you have done your entire life. And that doesn't mean a lot to everyone, but it means a lot to you. And it's going to mean a lot to that person. And like, dude, like what, you know, like you chose to be a writer. So that's what's happening. And that is cool, you know?
Yeah.
And that's still true. I mean, weirdly, I think it becomes differently and more true. Like I was telling a friend, one of the things that's hard about right now is that like a lot of the readers that mean a lot to me have already read it, you know, and so have like sent me emails or sent me texts or called me, and we've talked about it. And that felt like such a special gift, you know, to have these brains that I love sort of see and understand what I was doing. And I'm just trying to figure out a way, sort of what you're saying about keeping those emails. I'm trying to figure out a way to sort of keep that top of mind as I wait to get kind of batted about in the game. Because that does matter to me, but I forget it sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, like all it takes for me is like, if you know, one shitty review or, you know, Amazon comment or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be lying if I said it doesn't like stick to me for a few hours. You're just like, oh, you know, and I tend to believe the bad reviews and I don't believe the good ones and all that kind of stuff. You know, I think that's maybe human nature.
No, I mean, I I have whole excerpts of some of the bad reviews that I just recite to myself when I go running, just to be clear on like my mental health in all of this. Like it's, you know, like
sounds like a very healthy way to purge all that, you know, just running and like incanting it to yourself, basically.
It's especially useful during speed workouts. You know, I'm just like toxic, parasitic narcissist, you know?
Well, I want to talk because, you know, as we've been like going through this part of the conversation, it occurs to me that, like, along with money, class, the complexities of parenthood and being middle-aged and all that entails, your last two books, at least, have also been very good on the subject of art and what it means to be an artist, and that's very much in flight as it was in Want. And so, I don't know, I'm hoping you have a copy of your book somewhere nearby. I would love to have you read a short bit so that listeners can get kind of a sense. Look at that.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
But I'm going to set it up. I will set it up. You can add to the setup, or correct me before you begin, but
okay.
I'm going to have you read, in my advanced reader copy anyway, it was page 78 and then going to 79. And it is a section about Alice, who is married to one of Helen's sons. She's married to Henry, who is an artist. And Alice is formerly an artist. She kind of quit her art and has now become a social worker. And she wanted to have children, but her pregnancies didn't take. I think she had 5 losses. And so this is a character who's been thwarted in her desire to be creative, right? Or to create, right? I mean, that's kind of a theme in her life. And she feels dislocated at this stage of her existence, not quite knowing what her identity is. And trying to think if there's anything else. I guess also, you know, close to Helen, as everybody seems in this book seems to have been, even though, you know, Helen's her mother-in-law, and she had a particularly close relationship with her, as did Tess. Like, everybody loved Helen. I love Helen. I want to know Helen. You know?
I love Helen, too.
Yeah, so is that a good enough setup? I mean, to get us to where...
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I mean, I feel like it's worth saying, writer to writer, like, this page almost killed me. So I appreciate that you're having me read it, because it was hard to get right. I hope I got it right, but anyways.
No, you did. I think I'm glad. I mean, maybe that is the writer in me. I could zero in, but I was like, ooh, this is just right. I felt like that sense when I read it, so I flagged it.
I can't tell, like, this, like, the amount of times I tried to work on this. Anyways, I appreciate it. Okay, I'll read.
And so you know where you are. It's going to be Alice takes and then all the way to go get.
Perfect. Yes. Yeah, I'm very touched. Okay. Alice takes a long hot shower now that the house is still and quiet. She turns on the small space heater on her side of the bed, fists both her hands and rolls them along the edges of her hips. Her wrists still clench when she's tense, although she used to blame the painting, the ripping canvas, working. She misses having somewhere to put all the extra anxious, worn-out self that she still has. Her work now is more solid, like those years trying to have a baby had felt at first. It has clear, concrete goals, clear, concrete steps. The meetings, the court hearings, the protocols, and the people, just like the special foods, the yoga, the long walks. Lying on the bed and visualizing the healthy forming fetus, hands flat on her stomach, deep breaths in for a count of 6, out for a count of 8. But art and baby had also begun that last year to feel similar. Rules that felt specific and exact, but also made up. Trying to be precise, but precise like jumping off a cliff. Art was from the body, while a baby would be of it. Art was mushy, murky, abstract, while a baby would be solid. The obsession and compulsion were exactly like she'd always done them. But then all that time and work for nothing. In that way, too, it felt like art. She's most grateful for her job now because she doesn't have to deal with her own thoughts as often. Sometimes those years of the failed art and the failed baby. Her art was not a failure, Henry said, but no one gave a shit about it, so what else could it have been? When she felt empty, awful, she thought of calling Helen. She thought of asking Helen to love her, make it better. But what a stupid, silly, childish thing to say, to ask. I do already, is what Helen would have said. What Alice wanted was someone to prove it to her, prove something irrevocable about her, say it in such a way that she could feel sure that they would not take it back. Helen was the only one she might have trusted. Henry seemed to want her too unthinkingly to see how wanting wasn't loving. With every man who'd ever wanted her and called it love, she'd felt like this. This was true, too, in its way, of how her mother loved her. Preconditioned. The baby was something both Henry and her mother wanted that she couldn't give. Henry said he didn't. It was her choice, but she knew better. She thought maybe her body couldn't hold a baby because it understood she'd never really learned to love another person. Maybe also this was why her art failed. She'd not been shown or taught enough about just loving without first appealing or performing. This was her body's way of keeping all her future children safe. And then when she stopped working, and then with her new job and all the ways it shocked her, scared her, made her feel inadequate and helpless too, she'd never picked up the phone and called Helen, not with the art or with the babies, not this past year when her job got murky. It's a particular type of sad, she thinks, to miss the possibility that she might one day call this person who is gone now, that what she lost was a thing she never had the courage to go get.
So listeners should know that every character in this book is drawn like this. I mean, there's an incredible psychological intelligence that you have as a writer that you bring to the page. You know, to have a character who is dealing with multiple pregnancy losses, who would then feel thwarted in her art and would quit art, that makes such psychological sense to me. I imagine as a writer that made some sense to you on the page. Like, of course that's what she would do, you know? And yeah. I think that, like, you know, in full candor, my wife and I lost 5 pregnancies in between our 2 children. Oh, wow. So I've been down that road, and I think you never really get off of it. But it's one of these things where those kinds of losses are experienced mostly quietly, and yet there are ripple effects, and there are ways in which I've been trying through the years to detect how it's impacted my wife in particular, because she bore the brunt of it. So I don't know. I just really appreciated the way that you drew Alice, because it just felt right to me. It felt like, and it didn't just feel right in the sense that, like, oh, yes, of course, this is exactly what I expected. It surprised me. And then once I kind of got over the surprise, I realized, like, oh, yeah, there's real insight here. So kudos to you for sitting with her long enough and spending enough, you know, time on this this particular passage, but on the book as a whole, to get it right, to get these people drawn right. Because the ultimate impact on the reader, which is why I think your books are resonating with people, is that it's so emotionally involving. Like, I was kind of laughing to myself as I was reading this. I was imagining myself blurbing it, and I was like, the most stressful book I've read all year. You know, like, but I meant it. I mean it as a high compliment, because like, if I'm not stressed, I don't care. And like the fact that I was stressed, I was like, I'm like, oh my God, is that not only do I care about these characters, but what they're going through and the way that you've drawn them and the way that you've delivered me to their interiors has implicated me. And it's, you know, it's no coincidence that I'm a middle-aged writer with 2 kids and all the stresses that entails. I mean, I'm right there with them. So you're writing about my demo, but I don't know, just kudos. Like, are you somebody who reads a lot of psychology? Is this just something that you come by naturally, intuitively? Have you done a lot of therapy?
Yeah. No, I can't afford a therapist. That's a problem.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean, I think that's I just first want to say, I can't, because I really mean it, and because the longer I do this, it feels like the only thing that matters is that, you know, I think I told you last time how long I've been listening to you and how much I respect you as a reader and a thinker. And it matters to me that you said what you just said. And it also matters to me to say it out loud. So I just want to tell you, thank you. I think, like, I find being alive, like, I find pickup incredibly stressful. Do you know what I mean? Like school pickup incredibly stressful.
Oh yeah.
And I think, like, I was at this talk last weekend with Yun Lee and Gish Jen, and a thing that she said was that she has soft ears, and what that I think what part of what she was saying was that she's particularly impressionable to the wants and needs of the people around her, and I think that feels really true to me. Like, and I think some of that comes from a not great place, which is that I think there's a part of me, the person, not me, the writer, who's constantly sort of looking around the room and trying to gauge everybody's wants and needs such that I might give them what they want and need from me, which is a very stressful way to live, you know, and I think if I were in therapy, my therapist would try to help me get better at that. But I think as a writer, it's incredibly useful to me, right? Because that desire to engage and understand. And I think the difference between it in life and as a writer, and this is the kind of gift of being a writer as opposed to just like a deeply neurotic, anxious person, right? Is that as a writer, you sort of, there's that initial impulse, and it's even what you said about Alice, right? There's initial impulse of like, yeah, that makes sense, right? Like a thing that I would do as a person is I would sort of see Alice, and it also just means a lot to me that Alice means a lot to you because she means a particularly large amount to me. But I would be like, yeah, art and baby and quitting and a lack of like, there's so much there. That makes sense, right? But then the writing of the book is to name and understand that sense, right? The writing of the book is sort of getting inside of that sort of, again, that sort of Venn diagram of like, art is not baby. And also I think I was particularly, throughout this book, I was particularly interested in the sort of strange relationship between parenting and art, which is just kind of endlessly fascinating to me, and how they're actually quite different in a lot of ways to me. Like, I think that that's not as often acknowledged. And also I think a thing that I'm constantly interested in is that like, I find parenting as much a source of strength and power for me as a writer as I do find it as an impediment, right? So I think I was just interested in the sort of way that those two ideas are constellated in all sorts of ways throughout the book. And then particularly with Alice, those things are sort of more, they're a bit more tender than they are with the others, but they exist in the others as well. And I think maybe just the one other thing I would say is that, you know, one thing that I think a lot about, and I think I was playing with in the book, is that like for self-protective reasons, I think that, but also this feels really human, is I, like most people I know, have a tendency to want to jump, right? Like if we're using pickup as an example, like those are the cool moms and this is this mom and this, right? Like I have a tendency to want to categorize, but then of course what happens is if you spend any time at all with the actual human, and not just the idea that you have conjured in your head about who this person is, they will subvert that idea and they will surprise you. And that is honestly one of the greatest pleasures to me of being alive, right? Is just like spending enough time with another human, like actually listening to them, and then having them show you how absurd your initial impressions were. Like I just sort of, I love that, right? Like I love people showing me that I'm not as smart as I think I am, you know, and I love a book's ability, and even just spending all this time with these characters. Like I tend to write first drafts really quickly. But then I spend like a couple of years just like going back and going back and going back and going back and sort of looking for the corners in the scenes or the corners in the characters that are opportunities for those subversions or those surprises.
That makes sense that would be your process to me. Like at the level of psychological understanding, you know, that would come in the revision, and that would come with just kind of going over it a billion times, you know, and really concentrating on the text. And I think another thing that I want to talk about that is, you know, still related. It's like it's a few degrees removed, but it's part of what you're dealing with in this book is family, which it does such a lovely job of rendering. And you're working in a tradition, right? I think there is a tradition of family novels that we could point to How conscious of this were you when you set out to write? Like, was this something you knew you were doing, or was it something that occurred to you like midstream or after the fact?
I mean, I guess I was conscious of it. And I think too, like, I'm sort of the belief that there's no such thing, like newness is over, like there's not, everything's been done before. And if you think you're doing something new, chances are you just aren't reading widely, because I think most things have been done. And so I think, to me, my interest as a writer lie much more on like an initial new feeling impulse. I mean, much less on that and much more on a sort of that books live or die in the space of execution, And so I love family novels. I mean, weirdly, like, I think, you do all these things and people ask you where the book came from, and it could have come from a million different places. But I think in part it comes from like April 2020, when there were all those sirens outside our apartment, and I was watching the movie Home for the Holidays with Holly Hunter and Robert Downey Jr. like over and over and over again. And
this was in Brooklyn. This was in New York.
This was in New York. Yeah. And I think I was just like, I want to write a book that feels like this, because it just, there is something, I mean, I think part of the tradition of the family novel is its familiarity. And I think like at this specific moment in my life, I had a friend early read a pretty early draft of the book, and she's not a writer, and I wanted a non-writer to read it. But then she's very sweet, and she was like, okay, I don't know if this is a nice thing. She'd also read Want, which maybe feels important. She was like, I don't know if this is a nice thing to say, whatever. She kept qualifying. And then she was like, it felt like sort of a warm bath. And I was like, no, that's what I want. I wanted a warm bath, which is just to say, like, I did know the tradition. And I think when I started, I actually was really excited to be a part of it. I think maybe what happened by contrast, and again, maybe this is just something to work out with my fake therapist, is that I pulled out of the book and I was like, oh shit, I wrote a domestic novel. I'm a woman. What did I do? Like, does this book have any chance at all to be taken seriously as a serious book about what it is to be alive? Or did I fuck myself? And I'm going to get a bunch of sweet reviews about this sweet lady who wrote this sweet book about mothers,
No, I'm going to interrupt you and just say absolutely not, because this book captures like that warmth and just like the messy love. Like familial love is always messy. Love in general, like any kind of like close, intimate, loving relationship is going to have so many complexities and so many like subterranean twists and turns and all that kind of stuff. And you capture that messiness beautifully. You also are among, I think, the best contemporary writers that I've read when it comes to capturing just the absurdity of parenthood. I'm thinking of the scene in Starbucks with the cake pops in the bathroom, and I'm just like, oh my God, anybody who has kids has lived that, some version of that. And so it's nice to see that. I don't think it's not saccharine, but it also doesn't shy away from moments that are genuinely sweet, which life has too. So, I mean, if somebody's got a problem with that, I think they maybe need to look inwards. Like we all have those moments where you're like, oh, we get a little sentimental or something genuinely nice happens. Like there should be room for that too in fiction. And yet, and I want to say this to readers that I don't think spoils anything, just so that they have, I think, an accurate sense of all that this book is. And it is a lot of different things. But I said to myself aloud, as I was reading the back half of the book, I was like, oh my God, I'm getting like a strong, like Rick Moody, The Ice Storm vibe. Like I was like, or no, you know what I said to myself? I was like, ice storm energy, like with a feeling of like, with a feeling of destabilization. And I won't say anything more because I don't want to spoil anything, but just like, there's a real drama to this book too. Like it's, what is it? Whose blurb is it? Yeah. Rumaan Alam says it's suspenseful. Yeah. Like that word matters to me in terms of an appraisal of this book. It would feel incomplete without it. Like I think this is, even though it's a domestic book and it's about family coming together at the holidays, like I was on edge. Yeah. And we should say too, there's a subplot. You know, you have all these family characters, but there is one outlier set of characters who is not blood related to this family, but who figure greatly into the narrative. Mm-hmm. And that is Alice's, what do you call them? Client? She's a social worker, and she's been assigned to a young mother who's been struggling with addiction and her young daughter. It's Quinn and Maddie, right? Quinn and Madeline. So we have their narrative woven throughout this book, which adds, you know, a dramatic element that needs to be noted. And I don't want to spoil too much, but I just want to flag it. And I don't know if you have anything to add there. Like, I mean, that felt like a very particular choice to bring in these two people who I think are decidedly less privileged than the blood-related family that's at the heart of the story. But it felt like, I don't know, again, it just felt like a lovely choice. It was like, oh, wow, we're getting to kind of see some sort of mirror image of parenthood and struggle. It was just kind of perspective giving. I'm imagining creatively that's what you were going for, but maybe not. Like, tell me about that choice.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, again, I think, like, you know, back to this idea of us being sad that books can only do so much. I think that this book is largely me saying, okay, but what can books do, right? And I think one of the things that books can do is, if we have these set ideas and these set terms and even like these sort of tropes of what fiction is, we can elasticize those ideas maybe just a little bit, right? And I think I'm really interested in just stretching a lot of different ideas in this book, but if one of the ideas, I mean, first of all, I think elasticizing the domestic novel, I wanted a suspenseful domestic novel, right? And I think also, like, I wanted to sort of take the concerns of the book and then just turn the temperature up, because I think that, you know, this idea of parents and fussing and love and all of those things, they can feel low stakes and high stakes. And what you're saying, like, I find it stressful to just like walk into a room of other humans. Like, it's incredibly stressful. And like, I want to write a book that acknowledges that, like, being a human being is stressful, but also some of that stress is for good reason, right? Because our society is collapsing, right? And so I think, like, it was important to me that there be actual peril as a sort of, you know, not a counter, but a continuation of some of the concerns of early parts of the book. But I also think, like, I'm interested, if I'm interested in family, I think another thing that I'm interested is what we do with the impulse for caretaking outside of family and outside of, like, the clearly defined boundaries of family. And I think, like, the way that Alice transgresses boundaries and sort of misunderstands, or is just like grappling with how to understand how to care for people who are not her family, is just as interesting to me as family trying to figure out how to care for one another, you know. And I also think there's an early moment in the book that's really important to me where Quinn and Maddie are at the grocery store, and this mom is like, yeah, we're having 27 people for dinner, and the daughter, Maddie, is so upset, and Quinn's like, that sounds awful, right? And I want the reader to sort of at that point be like, yeah, it does sound awful, right? Like, I'm interested in the ways that Quinn and Maddie serve as an interesting counter to, if this is one definition of family, this house with all of these grown-ups kind of fighting over silly stuff, this is another and equally important side of family, which is just a mother and a daughter trying to love one another. They are also a family, right? And so, like, the domestic novel is often that first thing, but, like, this mother and this daughter are also trying to form a family. It's hard in different ways, but there's also, like, a lot of overlap, you know? I mean, I think I was also kind of playing with the ways that, I mean, I'm from Florida, which I feel like all by itself should explain my general interest and engagement with people's relationship to opioids. Because especially when I was coming up, they were just sort of everywhere. And they continue to be a lot of places in my life. And so I think this, like, again, this very human desire to say drug addict is a particularly challenging one for me, you know? And so I think Quinn has used substances in the past. Quinn is also the only parent that stays sober through the course of this novel. Every other parent in this novel gets kind of wasted, right? Like drinks a lot of like whiskey holiday punch or whatever. But like Quinn is technically the addict, you know? And so again, I think it was important to me to say which of these parents, I don't think any parent in this book doesn't deeply love their child. Right. But Quinn's mistakes as a parent have different consequences than everybody else's because of sort of past labels that she has been given.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, that's the thing is that like, I found myself thinking about consequences for failures as a parent, how cruel that can be. Yeah. Like in the case of Quinn and Maddie, like she fucks up, she loses her daughter permanently. Like those are the stakes for her, basically. Yeah. But then there's like, you know, the more quote unquote everyday failures that parents, that parents make, the mistakes that they make that wind up having enormous implications for their family, even though they don't want necessarily to screw things up. Just often is the case. That's life. Yeah. A friend of mine she works to get people, their kids, like get custody for their kids back. And a thing we talk about a lot is that like, if we had someone regularly knocking on our doors, would we pass? You know, like would we, like my house is a mess all of the time, you know, like would we pass inspection as parents if someone was regularly inspecting our parenting? I don't know. Yeah. Well, and also like, you know, you talk about resources, you talk about people who, you know, might be struggling with substance abuse, even while they're parents. You never, like it always goes deeper is the point. Like what was their childhood like? What kind of like resource situation do they come from? Do they have the support that they need? Well, so many of us, like you were saying, or like we were both saying, can't afford a therapist. And like, there's also a part of me, and I'm sure there's a good response for this. Like maybe I have a blind spot, but what I often will say is like, how fucked up is it that you have to pay somebody $200 an hour to give a shit about you? Like that's where we are as a society. Like to get somebody to actually listen in a meaningful way and to try to help you, you have to pay them $200 an hour because they're not going to take insurance most of the time. The good not all the therapists don't take insurance, but like the joke is like, would you really want to go to a therapist who's willing to deal with Blue Shield? I got to give that's my friend Melissa Broder, who I think originated that. She was like, I'm not going to a therapist that will deal with Blue Shield. So I don't know. It just feels true to life. And I think of people who are really up against it financially with substance abuse, parenthood, all those things coming down on them. And the world is not kind enough in its present incarnation too much of the time when it comes to all of us, but especially those who are in acute crises, you know? Yeah. I just reread Betty Howland's. Betty Howland's has this memoir called W3, which is about time she spent in a psychiatric ward. And there's this sentence that appears in the book almost out of nowhere that I think is from actually like a Coppertone ad. And it says, try a little tenderness. And it's just like completely out of nowhere. But I keep thinking about it, and I think about it in my work. And I was just thinking about it as you were talking, as there's just like, there's so much scarcity everywhere. And again, I think this is something that I'm interested in all of my work is like, where is the time and space and energy and humanity for just a little bit of tenderness, you know? Because I also think like, not only do I think to some extent I agree that like, it is really fucked up that we have to pay someone to talk to us. But I also think like, I at least will say that I am most comfortable paying someone to talk to me because I'm so nervous about if I'm allowed to take up someone's emotional and psychological space if I'm not giving them money, right? Like it feels like sort of, okay, if you are giving me your time and I am sort of being my particular version of too much, you know,
with you for an hour without compensating you, what does that mean? How do I do that?
Listen, I'll talk to you for free. You talk to me for free.
Yeah,
look at that. Look how that works.
This is what being on your podcast is. It's like intensive. A friend of mine recently stopped being a writer and became a therapist because she was like, or stopped. She wasn't writing very much, and she was mostly being a writing tutor. And she was like, it is the same thing, but less well compensated. And I was like, I really think you might be on to something. Like,
hey, I don't know. I think it's reciprocal. I give and I get from these exchanges. But I just want to say I'm such a fan of your work, and I love the work that you're doing. I think it's important, and I think it does what books at their best are supposed to do, which is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, and to say the quiet part out loud, and to bring some relief, to people who are suffering in silence or in the shadows, or with shame and all this other stuff. And that's a function that I think your books, these last two books, I got to confess, I haven't read Hold Still yet. So maybe that one's. You don't have to. It's not even that good. It's not even that good. I keep. But is it of a similar ilk? Is it of a similar DNA?
I can't help but be myself. I think, I pitched this essay to somebody. We keep going on, and you were saying such nice things, but I will tell you this, which is I pitched this essay to somebody, and then I failed to write it, but I do still want to write it one day, which is just like, I think the voyage, no book is as sort of interesting to me as a writer than The Voyage Out, which is Virginia Woolf's first novel, in some ways, because I think it's like a totally fine Henry James, E.M. Forster knockoff. And then she just like reinvented the novel, right? Like which is to say that like, I do think, not that I'm certainly not putting myself in that category, but I think there's a lot of, I think the thing about my first book, and I think the thing about these first books that I'm obsessed with, these sort of first books by writers I love that are not nearly as exciting to me as their later work, is that for me, with the first book, I was trying to write a book as the world had sort of shown me a book is meant to be. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that Want helped me understand was that the only way I'm ever going to make anything interesting is back to this elastic idea, right? Is if I'm writing a book in a way that only I could write books, And so I think like I still, again, like Hold Still holds all of my interests inside of it, but there were a lot of choices that I made in that book that I made because I thought that I was supposed to. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if you can make anything that you are like totally thrilled by from that. I was telling, I'm so sorry, I talk so much. Can I tell you one more thing and then we'll go home? Please. Yeah, please. I had a friend in grad school who there was a certain type of story I would say, or a certain type of thing that I would say, and she would go, "Oh, Lynn!" And this like really specific gasp. And I was thinking the other day that sort of my whole project as a writer is to make the choices, or to like think about the spaces that create that feeling of like, Lynn, which is like, maybe it's the stress. I don't know, but there are fewer Lynn choices in Hold Still, but I loved those characters and I thought about them for a long time. And I, I'm glad they're in the world. I don't think about them maybe as much as I do the ones that I've made since.
I love this term elasticize. I'm going to steal that. I think that's the way that we should all approach our books. You're working within a certain tradition or a certain form, but you've got to elasticize it and make it your own. Like, isn't that always some version of the project? Yeah. Love talking with you. So happy for you that this book is coming out. I predict good things for it. I think people are going to be into it. It's called Flight, and it's with Mariner Books.
Yep.
And is that did they publish Want? Is it or is it different? Different. Nope. Okay, so new on Mariner. Congratulations. Enjoy this part of the process as much as you can.
I will. I'm gonna readers like you. I'm telling you. It is always. I've told you this before, but your conversations with writers have meant a lot to me for over a decade, and it continues to feel like this extra special gift to get to actually talk to you. So thank you so very much for having me and for all of the conversations that you have had all of these. This is right? Because I distinctly remember being pregnant with my now 10-year-old and just like driving around listening to you. Like you sort of kept me going.
Your child listened to me in utero, for God's sake.
In utero, and now she's double digits, Brad. This is how long you have been in my life.
That's crazy. Pretty soon I'll be interviewing her. Who knows? She'll have a book out. Her memoir about what it was like to be mothered by you. It'll be Lynn and me.
Yeah. Okay, we could talk all day. So we should do our goodbye thing.
Yeah, it's nice to see you. Congrats once more. And are you working on a new book?
I am.
And you are. Okay. Any hints?
Florida. First book totally in Florida. And I have this idea about explosions, which I'm not going to explain because I've kept you for so long. But I want an explosion on every page.
All right. On that note, Lynn Steger Strong, it's nice to see you and nice to talk to you.
It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. It always feels like a gift.